All right, so this is going to be just a really brief overview of the Ableton Live session that I typically use every time I play at church, whether it's for worship or if I'm playing prayer cycles in the prayer room, or pretty much any time I play. I've developed this for myself, and it could be different for everyone. But I'm not saying you have to do this, or even suggesting that you should do something similar to what I have, because what I have is rather large and complicated, probably. But what I am suggesting is, just watch it, and maybe there's just one or two things that you can find that I'm doing that maybe it solves a problem you're already having, or maybe not. Maybe it's just something you like, and maybe you could implement it. So a lot of people, when I know a lot of people use Omnisphere, and they actually use the live mode. And I actually used that in my previous tutorial for showing how to make the example progressions. So in that tutorial listed here, so this is kind of what a lot of people will use. They'll turn their sounds on and off. And in Omnisphere, you have 8 patches. So with one instance of Omnisphere, you can have 8 patches for that multi. And so I really like the idea of having 8 patches, but I need a lot more than that. Plus, I have sounds that are outside of Omnisphere, such as my piano sound and a couple other sounds that I don't use Omnisphere for. So what I've set up here is basically a 16 sound session. Now, 16 sounds I hardly ever use, right? I mean, that's just a huge number of sounds. But maybe for a large set, like a 2-hour set or something, it gives me options. It gives me enough space to be able to do something creative. And so sometimes I'll use them, sometimes I won't. It gives me the ability to have something there ready. So these first 8 tracks that I have set up are pretty constant, so they pretty much don't change. I have a piano, and it's always on channel 1, and so we'll go through those, maybe what those are. Then I have a track here which is actually just loaded with one instance of Omnisphere. This instance of Omnisphere is feeding some of these tracks here. And then this instance of Omnisphere, a second instance, is feeding these 8 tracks. So I'm running 2 instances of Omnisphere, each with a multi that would be selected. And so these 8 tracks are always direct Omnisphere tracks. And then like 5, 6, 7, and 8 are all my very common pad kind of patches that I typically use no matter what. So if I didn't know what I was playing, or I didn't have time to set up these last 8, I would always have these first 8 and know exactly what they were, and I could play pretty much any song with just these first 8 patches. It's your common keyboard type sounds that you would typically run in a worship set. Then what I have after that is I have 8 audio tracks. These audio tracks are meant for holding, basically housing all of my pre-recorded loops. Now, one thing that you'll notice here is some of these audio tracks are going directly to the master, but then some of them, like these first 4, the glitch, percussion glitch, drum, these are actually being routed to something called 4-channel. So if we scroll all the way to the end of the session, here's 4-channel. All it is it's a separate output. So when I connect at church to our audio interface, they have an audio interface set up that only has 4 outputs. So typically one output, or the first output is my left sound, the second output is my right sound, the third output is our click, which right here is the Q out. I would set this to 3. And then the 4th channel, when I attach to that audio interface, I can actually set that right here and set this to 4. And so sometimes what I do is I send out the second percussionist kind of sounds out on that fourth channel, it gives our sound engineer in the back the ability to play with it a little bit and to be able to mix that in separately. Sometimes it lets me just shove those sounds through the system and not worry about how loud or how soft they are. So it really helps me out while I'm trying to produce all this other sound from all these other patches. I don't have to worry about the audio levels of these outputs, but then it gives him the ability to mix those in, maybe even add effects to them, so he has a little fun with it, as well as giving the mix what we want. Okay, so let's move on here to the next set. These next 8 tracks are meant, you'll notice that they're all arms, and these are actually meant for live recording. I will go into more depth of that in that later. And then I have a couple drum machine tracks, which are actually, they don't even need to be there. I never utilize these during my main set or anything like that. It's meant to create loops like this, so I just have it built in so I can save them here a lot easier. Then I have a main bus where I pipe pretty much everything to the main bus that I want to be able to live record. I have a piano bus meant for special, actually it's taking the audio from channel 2, and then I have that fourth bus. All right, so that is when I open up my session, this is what it looks like. Now, the important parts of this, I mean, if you look at this, it's really not that bad. We have 8 instruments, so a total of 16 instruments. We got 8 available tracks for audio, pre-recorded audio loops. We have 8 available tracks for, live recording, and then we got some buses out here at the end in order to route everything properly, and we'll go over that routing, I'm sure. All right, so let's go through some of these. So this piano is the Giant, so I'm using Native Instruments, the Giant, and I really like it. I think it's got a good tone to it. Still trying to play around with it a little bit and tweak it every once in a while here and there. Most of my settings here are kind of set up for maybe not what sounds the best over the computer here, but kind of what sounds best through my particular system at our church. So I want to make sure that, that it's really bright and it kind of comes through good. So we filter off a lot of the lows and stuff like that, so you'll hear it's kind of anyway. That's the piano, and we'll go over those settings probably in a future video. In channel 2, I'm also running a contact, but in this one, it's not just one instrument. I have 4 instruments. This one, I'll just solo an instrument based off of what's useful for the particular set that we're doing. So, if we're doing, you get an organ on here. So of course, I don't know how to play the organ, so I very rarely use this, but sometimes there's just a sound or like a droning sound that I might just pull it up. We are here for you. something like that, just a drone. We also have right here a the Mark II Classic is what I'm using here, and it's basically electric piano. I don't actually use that often, but there's times when I want to pull it in and I want to maybe even layer it with the piano. Not always. And then here I have the Giant, and it's actually the cinematic version. And I have some settings here that I have set up, and I typically saved this one on there actually for a particular song. Which song you say? All to Him. Sometimes we do All to Him. And I have this audio effect rack where I have a compressor, reverb, and delay. And so if I turn on the compressor and the delay and arm it, so there you can hear that. And I typically save that because I use that for that's the intro to All to Him, and or at least my version of the intro. And so I keep that loaded up because we like to do that song quite a bit every once in a while. And then I have another version of the Giant here. There's a couple different things on this audio effect rack, something called a main piano and a cloudy piano. So the difference between them, if you solo those out, that's with the main, and then this is with the cloudy. So you can kind of get an idea of that, and I'll use that cloudy piano maybe for some adoration sets to get them started. Sometimes I'll get started with like a 1, 2, 6, maybe a 1, 5, 4, something like that. But I'll just maybe start something with like a really verbed out piano, and then it really kind of sets the atmosphere. So that's what I have in track 2. So track 1 is my go-to piano. Track 2 are some of the other more common keyboard type sounds that support that I usually use. And then here in track 3, a bell sound. And I like layering the bell with the piano, maybe during the big parts of a song. So you might be like a I'll reach over, tap it on. But I like to use that during the big, some of the bigger parts of the songs. So that's the bell. Here in the 4th track, what you'll notice is I'm actually using an instance of hybrid. And the reason I'm using that is, well, because I won it in a remix contest. And I just feel like I have to use it for something. And it has a ton of presets here, and some of these presets are actually really good. I've not even been able to dive into this instrument yet, but I have it set to this glass ARP, which is just Sometimes like when we're trying to do maybe like there's a little bit of energy that needs to build in a particular song, and like we don't really want the drum to kind of build that yet, but we just want something kind of rhythmic. So I'll pull in like this bass arpeggiation sound here, which will it'll kind of help start to build that anticipation of the build of an actual build, and then it really helps out a lot in certain times. But I kind of have that set to that. I hardly ever use it actually, but sometimes it's very useful. Okay, so 5, 6, 7, and 8 are all my bass pad sounds that I usually use to layer everything else with. Okay, so here's 5. I'll get pretty high on the keyboard here. And then one thing you'll notice is I can change this mod wheel up. So just by changing the mod wheel, it goes from something that's very kind of warm to something that, you know, it moves the cutoff on the filter, lets a lot more of those highs through. So that's 5. Number 6, I'm playing with 6 still. I don't always, 6 always changes. That's the only one between 1 through 8 that changes a lot. And no mod wheel movement on that. But I typically always have 5 on there at least, so I'd layer it. You'd have some highs. Kind of mix them together, and then something with a little movement in it, and you layer that in with 5. Pull up the mod wheel just slightly, let a little more brights through, add the piano. Sometimes it works using stuff like that. So here on 8, I have this patch, which just sometimes it can really get out of control if you're not careful. But I love using it, and I love the little sparkle. Did you hear? I've filtered a lot of the highs out because it was really punching through the house at church, but I love using it, and it just kind of brings this, I don't know what it does, I just love it. Okay, so there's that. So those are my main 8 sounds that I typically always use. For the second 8 sounds, I mean, these will change, you know, every week based on what cycles we're doing, what songs we're doing, things that I know I just want to complement my bass sounds here because I want something more. Maybe I wanted a little different type of pad, or I want a synth or something to go along based on what I feel like I'm going to be playing for that particular song, that set list. I'll load up special sounds here for that. And I'll probably go into a lot more detail and maybe in a future video on how I set up my Omnisphere and organize it so that I can find those per song and stuff like that. So I think that gives us you guys a kind of a pretty good idea of how I have everything laid out. I have 16 different sounds, I have loops, and I have the ability to do some live recording. We'll go deeper into maybe some of the patches, some of the sounds I like to use a lot, maybe how I actually create my loops, because that was something I remember back starting out, that I was trying to get information from people on how they actually did that. And there's so many different ways. You don't have to do it any one particular way. really, this whole set is not meant for you to copy. It's not meant for you to do anything like this. The purpose of this is to maybe give you an idea of what someone else is doing so you can see it, and that might actually give you an idea. Or maybe you'll take one part of this session, or the way I have something set up. You'll take one piece that you just really like, and you'll re-implement that in yours. And the goal is, what you really want to do is come up with a particular workflow, something here that's easy for you to use at your workstation, so that you can very quickly switch between patches, switch between BPMs or sounds and clips and loops, and whatever makes that fast and easy for you, that's what you need to use.